Hi, and welcome to the latest edition of Listen MKE Live, a project of the Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, the Milwaukee Public Library, and Milwaukee PBS. I'm Daphne Chen, investigations reporter for the Journal-Sentinel, and I will be joined today by columnist and Ideas Lab reporter, James Causey. Today's conversation is going to focus on a topic that we don't talk about enough, the history of both tensions and solidarity between the Black and Asian communities. But we are going to talk about it today with guests Shary Tran, executive board member of the AAPI Coalition of Wisconsin and co-founder of ElevAsian, Sherwin Hughes, host at 101.7 FM, The Truth, and a longtime Milwaukeean who has spoken about the subject on air. And later in the show, we will also be joined by a couple that's found love across this divide, who will talk about some of their personal experiences being in an interracial relationship. Remember, you can join this conversation by submitting your questions on our Facebook page. We will try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And now let me turn it over to my co-host, James Causey.
Hey, thanks for joining us. This should be a very deep conversation, and I'm happy that we could have some great guests on to talk about this. I'm going to start off with Sherwin Hughes because this is a topic that's been discussed a lot, and it has deep-rooted history behind it. So, Sherwin, can you set the stage of where we are today as far as race relations are between the Asian community and the Black community?
In a word, I would say that they are complicated. And I also want to give respect to the diversity that is the Asian community. So you have the Southeast Asian community, but then you also have the Southern Asian community, which would be individuals who are from the country of India. And what I have seen, like just through my anecdotal evidence and my life experience, is that anti-Black racism crosses the Pacific Ocean. So if there are individuals from any Asian country, they may know a few things about the United States. I'm talking first generation folks. They may know some of the stereotypical negative images that permeate the media about African Americans. And so when they come to this country, that is one thing that's very easy to understand, that African Americans were less than, were criminals, every negative stereotype that you can adhere to. But also to come to America and understand this place is to know that African Americans are ripe for economic exploitation. And it's interesting because the Southeast Asian community, quite honestly, live amongst African Americans, especially in the Milwaukee community, wherever we are. We have Southeast Asian neighbors, or they'll own businesses and shops in our neighborhoods. But as far as how the social relationships are between the two communities, I'm glad that we're having this conversation, because I don't know if there's ever been an opportunity to bridge the divide other than the economic exploitation that I see every single day.
And we're going to talk a little bit about that, but this history goes back to Frederick Douglass. I know Frederick Douglass talked about this back in 1862, I believe. So can you talk a little bit about the history? So bring us up to date as to how we got here.
So my understanding is, especially in Southeast Asian communities, a lot of them came to the United States after the Vietnam War as they were allies with the United States in fighting the North Vietnamese. And so a lot of folks got refugee status here in the United States, and some of them lived in urban communities where a lot of African Americans traditionally lived. And business opportunities existed in those communities because African Americans were not occupying spaces and storefronts. So that provided some opportunity for some Southeast Asian folks to take some of the business experience and the education they may have gotten in their countries and then used it here. But then when I look at whenever we have civil unrest, and this goes back to what really got my attention in 1991 when Latasha Harlins was murdered by a Korean store owner in Los Angeles, and you had the LA riots in 1992. I mean, I was 16, Latasha Harlins was 15, and the store owner accused her of shoplifting a $2 bottle of orange juice in which Latasha had the money for the orange juice in her hand, and then Latasha was shot in the back of the head. And then the woman who killed her, the Korean store owner, got basically time served, 9 months of probation, and she had to pay the funeral expenses. And a lot of folks say that the riots in LA in 1992 was not because of the police officers that were acquitted for beating Rodney King. It is because how that particular shop owner and how so many other business owners in the Black community treat African Americans. And so I don't know if we have ever healed the wounds that have existed since then. But I do know that we still do occupy the same geographic space. And then, of course, when we had the most recent shooting in Atlanta, then we want our communities to come together, because if there's one thing the Black community is good for, we will march with you, we will protest with you for racial equality and racial justice. But the part that confused me was we've always, as Black people, struggled with racial equality, and every other minority group that comes to this country, they attempt to distance themselves from us until white supremacy strikes them too. Now we're all friends and we all want to collaborate.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because if you want to talk about recent incidences, it's the whole incident with George Floyd as well, with the Asian officer who didn't offer any kind of assistance when the officer had his knee in George Floyd's back. I'm going to turn it over to Shary Tran now. And Shary, with what has been said so far, how do you view relations between both communities right now?
It's interesting, just the perspectives that are shared. And there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of history behind just where we are today. But I think from my perspective, I see that this new generation of Asian Americans is really bringing a very different approach to, racial relations between the communities. I think, as Sherwin said, there's a generation that came right after the Vietnam War ended, a lot of refugees, and even a lot of the Hmong refugees that came to the United States as well. And knowing that we have a shared experience in terms of, living in the same communities, experiencing the same levels of struggle and poverty and, lack of resources, there's so much shared experience that sometimes doesn't get, the same kind of attention. That we really need to start looking at those commonalities more so than the differences. I think right now there's more attention to how we can come together, how we can support one another, and not just because it's immediate a need just because of Atlanta. There's been a lot of Asians for Black Lives events and movements happening. A lot of trying to change the perceptions of older generations, the new generation and the younger generations of AAPI Americans in the United States are really trying to, bridge that gap and making those efforts to, create that conversation, those hard conversations that are multi-generational, kind of passed down, kind of that kind of learned racism that gets passed down from generation to generation, and trying to be the ones to break that cycle. I think that's something that is something that we should be paying more attention to and really recognizing as well. And I think when I really appreciate, Sherwin, the recognition of the diversity within the Asian diaspora as well, because as like especially in South Asian, like Indian countries, for example, colorism is still an issue, and that kind of comes with that experience in the United States and adds to some of that, anti-Blackness that occurs. And we recognize that it is prevalent in our Asian communities, and we are trying to address that. I think that's something that we need to first, have these conversations. I'm glad you're hosting this kind of conversation, James, because this is, like you said, a topic that hasn't been talked about as much. And if it is talked about, it's always not necessarily what's going right, but what's been going wrong. So I think this is a good opportunity to really look at those opportunities to build.
I'm kind of wondering what you guys think about the role that media plays here. So whether it's film or news media or social media, what's kind of the imagery or the stereotypes that are being portrayed, and how how's that changed, if you feel like it's changed. So maybe Shary, I'll send it back to you for this one, and then Sherwin.
Sure. So that's a great question, or a great topic as well, because I think, Sherwin, you touched on this as well, about just what do people see when they think about, the experience in the United States? And a lot of that is kind of fed to, countries overseas, that they only see what the media shares, whether it's, Hollywood's depiction, which tend to be very stereotypical and very narrow depictions of all different races. You may see the stereotypes against Asians in the same way. So there's a perspective that's very stereotypical around what the Asian experience is, what the Black experience is. And they're typically not necessarily the truth. They're very, limited. And it creates this perpetuating stereotype that we tend to carry with us. And if that's the only experience we have with diversity, or the only experience we have about anyone from a different background, that really puts us at a disadvantage, because, it's a very skewed perception. So I think the media has a very strong responsibility. When the COVID outbreak started to come out, we really called upon the media to stop posting pictures of, Asians every time you talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, because that was helping to exacerbate the connection or the stereotypes against Asian Americans. And we just kind of see how that's kind of continued to compound and create more of the environment that we're seeing today. So there's definitely a lot of power in the images we share, the narratives that we paint around different ethnicities and races and groups.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Shary. That actually reminds me of just right now, there's a lot of media out there about Asian and Asian Americans that is the crazy rich Asians kind of model minority stereotype that kind of erases a lot of the diversity of class, of gender, of all these other forms of identity that make Asian Americans not a monolith. Sherwin, what do you think about the role that media plays?
I think the media plays a huge role. I think it's played a role in creating the stereotypical narratives around not just Asian folk, but Black folk as well. Even in my formative years growing up, you would see these terribly negative and stereotypical images of Asians. And, even in cartoons that we'd watch on Saturday morning, you would see some of these horrible images that get ingrained in people, and you just think that it's normal. And the way that Donald Trump was able to essentially pin the pandemic on one particular group of people means that those stereotypes are able to stick even after many generations of wonderful Americans participating in this country and, being just as American as anybody else. It seems that just a couple of comments can revert everybody back to how stereotypes were, pre-World War II or during World War II Japanese internment camps. And I think the media plays a role in maintaining some of those images. But then at the same time, I think the media can also be very instrumental in communicating the very complicated nature that exists amongst communities, but then also between, so intra and inter community, African American, Asian, South Asian, et cetera. So yeah, the media can take their fair share of blame in just about all of our negative things that we see.
Yeah, I want to tell the audience too that they could submit questions to us, and we'll try to get as many questions answered as possible from our guests. I want to continue along what you were saying, Sherwin, when you were talking about the media. This same media helped to create this falsehood too that has started and grown, that it indicates that Asian Americans work harder. They are why can't Blacks get and achieve the same things they have? Why can't Blacks own stores in their own communities? And Asian Americans can own stores in these communities. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that creates the friction in the communities that a lot of these businesses are located in?
Yeah, this is, of all of the issues, I think this is the toughest one to overcome, because you have this stereotype that, of course, doesn't come from either of our communities, but comes from white supremacy itself. It is the model minority. Why don't you work hard, get an education like so many of these other minorities that have come to America? But a lot of those other groups that have come to America that are able to survive and thrive have never dealt with centuries of anti-Black white supremacist racism. So they'll come to America with a culture, with a language, with a profound sense of who they are, and they can essentially transport their culture that goes back centuries, that was intact, to America and still maintain a lot of that cultural resemblance here in America, where African Americans have had to deal with centuries upon centuries of oppression and white supremacy. So no, we can't be like the model minority because we didn't have the opportunity to get an education, to develop business skills, or even get a college degree in some other country, and then bring all of those skills and sometimes money and wealth to the United States. So it's a lot easier when someone is able to cultivate and grow and solidify their culture somewhere else, put it in a suitcase, and then bring it to America, where African Americans had to literally fight for every single opportunity that we get. So comparing us to the quote unquote model minority is another stereotypical and racist trope.
Yeah, Shary, can you expound on that?
Sorry, I muted myself there. My experience as well, as a refugee family coming to the United States, we didn't have anything but the clothes on our backs when we left the country and coming here. So, really this perception around the model minority myth, it's absolutely, what it says, it's a myth, because it's really taking the responsibility for your success and pinning it on the individual and taking all responsibility away from the systems that exist that perpetuate the racism and the disadvantage. So it's not blaming systems, it's blaming individuals, which isn't fair, right? So it's kind of pointing the finger at like, well, why can't you be as successful as this person? Not saying that you're not getting the opportunity because the system doesn't allow you to. So I think that's the big disconnect around the model minority myth and why it's been perpetuated, as Sherwin said, by white supremacy. It's been designed to separate, to divide, to drive a wedge, to pit minorities against one another, which has been largely successful, to be honest, over time, because we have been kind of, it's been like a whatchamacallit, kind of like a smoke and mirrors kind of thing, like, oh, don't pay attention to this racist system. It's the people that's the problem. And that's not really the truth. I think, Chinese Americans have faced racism for centuries as well, dating back to like the 1800s when they were brought over and used as very menial labor. They were treated as less than Americans, weren't even considered to be, citizens. They were seen as less than. A lot of stereotypes and even, showing them as evil, inherently evil, and taking jobs and just really creating this narrative of Asians as dangers to America, and really building upon that over the years. So they've been victims of oppression as well for centuries, and the experience of losing their identity hasn't been as prevalent as maybe within the Black community, because they forced to really create their own communities where they could create their own businesses. Like that's where Chinatowns came from, right? They weren't able to open businesses amongst the general population. They had to kind of create their own. And that's where those enclaves of Asian communities kind of started, because they weren't allowed to do it anywhere else. So there's definitely been, this myth, but I think the big takeaway about the model minority myth is, like you said, Sherwin, neither one of our communities started this, but we're both victims of it, because it pits us against each other and kind of takes the attention away from the real oppressors in the situation.
So I think this is a good time to show when we work together as one community. So a lot of people don't realize this, but the Asian American, that term was coined in 1968 by UC Berkeley students who were inspired by the Black Power movement. And at this time, Asian American students rallied alongside Black student organizations and other ethnic student groups to form the Third World Liberation Front at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley in the late 1960s. And so they participated in marches, equal opportunity drives, and they forced the forthcoming ethnic studies program. Mm-hmm. Can you guys pinpoint other ways that we have worked together as one community and found true success and helped each other out?
Well, I think the geographic integration, because people of color have traditionally lived in particular areas where people, white folks, have lived in other areas. So there's always been proximity. And I grew up in Brown Deer in the 1980s and the 1990s. And every year that I was in school, including kindergarten, I went to school with a variety of Asian folks, whether it's South Asia or Southeast Asia. So there's always been that proximity. And the way I looked at it as a kid is that we were all kids going to the same school. We all played sports. We all, collaborated together, et cetera, et cetera. So there always was, the friendly, plutonic kind of friendships because of the proximity between our community. Right now, I live in the middle of the African-American community, and I've got Hmong neighbors who are some of the most wonderful people that I've ever met in my entire life. I think that we can still face the same kinds of racism and discrimination, but I don't know if we see it as equal. And what pains me is whenever there is civil unrest, and there always is civil unrest, whether it's here or somewhere else, some of the first businesses that are vandalized and looted are Asian businesses. But at the same time, the owners of those businesses are our friends and our neighbors and people that we went to school with. So I think that there is still something either unresolved or unspoken about the relationship. And maybe it's, because sometimes economics can put people against one another, one culture versus another culture, one community versus another community. But I've always been troubled by the vandalism and destruction of Asian stores almost first, even though the issue that we have is with white supremacy, is with a white police officer. That's where our anger is. But we vandalize those businesses, it seems, intentionally and very much on purpose.
And real quick, so that's a very interesting point. What sparks that anger where you feel like you have to go in and destroy this business that you probably did, that you shopped at during the moments of unrest? What sparks you to go into a Jet Beauty, which was vandalized during the Sherman Park unrest, and go in there and vandalize that place, steal hair, burn the building up, and all this kind of stuff? What sparks that? I think that's what a lot of people don't understand.
African-American women will tell you, and I've even witnessed it firsthand, when they go into nail shops or they go into beauty shops to buy their products, they don't often get the best customer service, or there's this feeling, this subjective feeling that they're speaking negatively about African Americans because we obviously don't know the language. And there's always been this tension between the business owners and their African American clientele. I think that's number one. Number two is I've never seen, now granted, I don't go into nail shops hardly ever, and I certainly don't buy wigs or hair. There's never African American employees, right? But these businesses are located right in the middle of the Black community, and we're very mindful of that. If you're going to have and operate a business in our community, which we spend our money at, let's be very clear about that. But if we don't see Black employees, then that kind of brings up an interesting dynamic as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sherwin, you had mentioned economics earlier, and so a statistic we wanted to get your thoughts on was in 2013, 39% of Black children were living in poverty compared to 10% of Asian children. That same year, young Asian adults with bachelor's degrees or higher made $59,000 per year compared to about $20,500 earned by their Black counterparts. So maybe we can go to you first and then Shary, but what comes to mind when you think about some of these economic disparities?
So education is a very interesting one because it seems, and this is just me as an outsider looking in, that taking advantage of educational opportunities seems to be more culturally ingrained in Asian communities, whether it's Southeast Asian or Southern Asian. It is just the expectation of first generation Asian parents, or first generation children rather, that education is just like, you don't have a choice. You're going to do well in school. You're going to, be all that you can be because of the opportunities that exist in America that may not exist in the home country. Where when it comes to African Americans, one of the places in which we are discriminated against the most is in education, whether it's higher education, whether it's lackluster public schools, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's less culturally ingrained. Like, I don't know if the standards, and I shouldn't be stereotyping my own people, but I know that I've noticed the difference that at home, Asian children just have this high level, and it's unfairly high, I think, that their expectations of academic success is so incredibly high that they almost feel like they don't have a choice. Where with Black children, because we are bombarded with so many issues and problems and disparities all over the place, that education and educational attainment is kind of like second or third tier in the overall struggle for our fight for fairness and equality.
Shary, how about you? What's coming to mind?
one thing I would challenge is the statistics that you're sharing, Daphne. I would ask, were you able to find, call outs or distinctions in that Asian data for Southeast Asian students or Hmong students, or, the fact that I'm sure you probably didn't have an easy time finding specific data because all data is aggregated under one big umbrella of Asian, which is a big challenge for our community. Because if you were able to just aggregate that data, you would see that Southeast Asian students have the highest high school dropout rate in the country. And when you couple that with these stereotypical expectations of high performance, that creates serious, self-esteem issues, mental health issues that Southeast Asian students now think, okay, is there something wrong with me if I'm not achieving and everyone expects me to? Another issue that comes out of that is, not just the skewed perception that, hey, all Asians are successful, because that's not necessarily true. When you break out the data, it could be, highly skewed based on one, Asian subcategory over others. But then also people start to not assume that you need any assistance and don't provide that assistance. There's a lot of students that aren't getting the resources they probably need to be more successful in school because they're perceived to not need it. And the only data that exists helps support that hypothesis, right? Because it kind of largely ignores the uniqueness between the different groups in the Asian diaspora. So I think that's a challenge as well.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, that you had touched earlier, Shary, on the idea of the diversity of experiences in the Asian American community. And, I think that people who came over here as refugees have like a very different experience as Asian Americans versus people like maybe my family who came over as Chinese Americans, in the 90s with educations. And so I just wanted to say that rings true to me.
Yeah, and what I was going to say is, Sherwin, you had a great experience because you went to, I believe, Brown Deer High School. See, I went to John Marshall High School, and I was before that I went to Jackie Robinson Middle School and Samuel Clemens. And honestly, I didn't have any real contact with anyone from the Asian American community until I started working at the paper, and that when I started working with one of my colleagues, Mabel Wong. Before then, I really didn't have many connections other than, going to a store or something like that they may have owned. My connections, and I think a lot of people experience this in the city, our connections with different communities could sometimes be skewed or it's almost like a business transaction. My only way of seeing you and spending time with you is during a business transaction. And I think we have to overcome that some kind of way and get to the point where we could like see each other in different aspects. So I think that creates a lot of the problems that we have as differences in our communities. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to make that statement.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
maybe now,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say maybe now is a good time to get a little more personal and bring on our couple. Shary Lee and his partner, Jara, are here to talk about this issue from a little bit more of a personal perspective, what it's been like to be in an interracial relationship. And so welcome. And maybe to start with, you can just tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you met. And we may need you guys to unmute your mic, unfortunately.
Sorry about that. We met as students. He was working on his PhD, and I was attending a post-bac program to go to medical school. So that's how we met, and we actually didn't meet on campus. We met volunteering at a community event, which is it's called the Summit of Hope, and is for people who are incarcerated and then released into the community. So it's designed to help with reintegration and to help parolees access resources and other things that are available to them in the community after they're released. And that's like kind of how we met.
Wonderful. And so it's been a wide-ranging discussion today, and So much has happened this year surrounding racial justice, from the Black Lives Matter protests to the anti-Asian violence. How has it been for you guys, watching it and living it and processing it?
It has been a lot to take in, because my major or my area of expertise is criminology. So I'm actually a university professor, not here, but in Duluth, Minnesota. And just, reading about it, watching what's going on, it's a lot to take in. And a lot of questions, people ask about, how does it affect the criminal justice system or criminology in general? And, how does it impact, a variety of people, not just Black individuals? So it's been tough, but knowing the education and aspects behind Black Lives Matter and things that have happened within this past year, we understand that, these things need to happen too. Not so much, the recent activities, but, the Black Lives Matter activities need to happen for reform to change. You have anything to add, honey?
Oh, I think personally for me, it's been a tough experience. And I think it's also been an opportunity to have discussions amongst us, also with his family members, about my experience as being a Black person. And then that's also opened up opportunities. Some of the things that are happening now currently, opportunities for him to have discussions about his experience. And I think one of the most, it's been difficult and emotionally difficult. I think all people can say that, but I think one of the things I feel that's beneficial between us is that it opened up that dialogue. And I think we really had to have a chance, we had a chance to have a discussion about our experiences that are very unique for different reasons. And this acknowledgement that hierarchy, a racial hierarchy, exists in the United States, and different communities are, that was my phone. That different communities face unique and different challenges based on the structure of that system. And that it's more beneficial to work together, but also understanding that that sometimes what we encounter in the community and what we're struggling with as racial groups is very distinct and unique from each other. And not to rank them, but just this acknowledgement that they're very different. And the things that I experience in my life and the challenges that I may face are going to be very different than what he faces. And there are commonalities and there are shared experiences, but I think it's just the acknowledgement that they are unique and distinct for different reasons. And not only that, but that we're fighting against this racial hierarchy that presents that creates those unique challenges for the distinct communities. So I think that's what's been beneficial for me. And then also just being able to interact with his family and he being able to interact with my family, I think that changes perceptions about what those challenges might be for our communities. So that he can see how I live, he can see the neighborhood that I grew up in, what I faced. I can go to his home, meet his family members, and understand what their experience has been like coming here as refugees and establishing themselves. And they're very different and they're very unique, and they also have shared experiences. And through those experiences, competing against the system that exists here in the United States, we both see commonalities and strengths. So I would say determination and hard work and resiliency, and that those characteristics are common between us.
Just getting to know each other, and by engaging in dialogue, we see the nuances of the systems that exist.
Yeah. James Causey with the Journal Sentinel. You talked about the challenges that you face on a constant basis, but how do you support each other? I mean, how does that work? Do you talk all the time? Do you like vent? I mean, what does that sound like? What does that look like?
I think there's talking, there's venting, there's like getting like, you don't understand, and there's he's like, you don't understand, and it's those conversations had to happen to like have a mutual understanding. And I think it's just the fact of like feeling comfortable to have the dialogue with him, and also like his mindset about the dialogue, like understanding that what I'm trying to say is representative of my unique experience. And it's not about comparison. It's sometimes just about listening and understanding like what I'm facing and the unique challenges that I'm like going through. And that what I'm experiencing may be very different than anything he's ever experienced, and for different reasons. And so that's kind of how we've had that. And so we have that dialogue, and it also helps that we have the dialogue. So I feel like in situations where he encounters like people in his family where they may not have an understanding of like why he would want to be with someone like me, or for that instance. But I feel like our conversations helps him be able to communicate that in a way that's like that I can appreciate, so that support comes through in that way. And I feel like I do the same. Like if I encounter anything from my family or people who have perceptions about it not being able to work, or whatever perceptions they have, I think the conversations that we have amongst ourselves, it gives me enough knowledge to be able to go and communicate with other people. And I feel like that's also a form of support. Yeah. And then we obviously support each other in other ways. If there are things that he's doing to support his community, me participating in that, like I'm going to do that, I'm going to be down for that. And he's been the same way for me all the time, and just showing up when he needs to show up. Yeah. And I think like being able to, yeah.
So the main takeaway point is just listening, to each other, and understand the differences that we bring to the table, and just acknowledge those differences.
I just wanted to remind viewers that we're listening to Listen MKE Live, a project of the Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, the Milwaukee Public Library, and Milwaukee PBS. You guys can still put questions into our Facebook chat, which we'll get to at the end. Maybe just one more question for our couple. I'm personally curious if there's anywhere where you guys weren't in alignment, and maybe you disagreed, or there was are there examples of things that you didn't understand that had to be discussed, or were maybe brought out by some of the events this year?
I think specifically, I think there's a lot of like, historically, I don't think people receive enough education about the experience of Black people here in the United States, and historically what has happened. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I think people have perceptions without understanding like the complete picture, and understanding like the progression of things that have occurred. And so I've had to, say, no, like correct information that I feel like that he's received from somewhere that's not accurate, and direct him to resources to help educate himself on those things. And he's done the same for me, send me resources in regards to like the Hmong experience and the history of Hmong people in different places, and how maybe I don't understand the full history of what exactly has happened. So I think a lot of times when we have had like misunderstandings, I'm like, where are you getting this information from? Like, why is that your perspective? It has come down to a breakdown of like misinformation and a lack of accurate information and history. And so, yeah, I think that's where it's like come from.
Yeah, it goes back to education. It's not just about education, but what type of education are you getting? And sometimes, just being in school and going through, master's and PhD, I didn't get deep enough information about racial issues until, I met her and I started talking to her, and she directed me to resources that helped me realize, okay, the things that I've actually studied, I only study surface level. I need to dig deeper into, racial aspect of, crime and criminal justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
But if I could just, one more thing for the couple, I know you guys are both intelligent, both college educated, very smart and all this stuff. I think this is deeper than, I don't think this is an educational topic on that level. I think this is more of a topic on a different type of level. I guess what I'm saying is that relationships, you can't, it's not enough like book education you could get on the, I think this comes down to us really trying to understand each other on a just a basic human level, and really trying to understand that, hey man, I understand the struggles you're going through. We're going through the same struggles, but I need you to respect my struggle.
Yes.
I will respect yours. I think that's where the disconnect comes in a lot when we have differences in our communities. We look at all these other things, but really it comes down to just respecting the fellow man and really having that common decency to say, hey, when you come into my store, I hope, I don't have this perception in my head that you're going to steal, or when I come across you, I want you to understand why I can't achieve, or what's been stacked up against me as a Black man living in Milwaukee, or living in America, or as a Black woman living in this country, or a person of a different group living in this country, and all the baggage that comes with that people just don't seem to understand. And that makes it so hard. But when we get to the level where we can actually start understanding each other at that level, I think things would be a lot better.
We've had those conversations, and there have been situations where something makes me really uncomfortable, and I have to say look, this is why I'm coming from this perspective. This has been my experience, and these are the things. And we've gotten down there. He's had those same conversations when he's felt that maybe I'm not being supportive, or maybe I don't understand something and I'm not understanding his perspective, or why he's approaching something from a particular way. So we have had those discussions for sure, on the personal level about personal experience as well. But I also think that misinformation plays into those things sometimes too. So, yeah.
Cool. I want to give people, since we all are on right now, is there something that, if we could say we need one thing to happen for our relations to be better amongst each other, what needs to happen? If we could go around and just talk about what needs to happen and how we get there. I will start with you, Sherwin. What needs to happen to build up our relationships with each other?
So I would like to see more shared social space. So an example would be Milwaukee. I don't know if we still are. We used to be the city of festivals, where we had, African World Festival, Festa Italiana, Mexican Fiesta. There's an Asian Moon Festival, Indian Summer, etc. But it's weird because these are these cultural exhibitions where the different diverse communities are celebrating, what their culture is, but also promoting their culture in a segregated city. But it almost seems like African World Festival is just for Black people, and Asian Moon Festival is just for Asian people, and Festa Italiana is just for the Italians. So I think if we had more places where we could ask questions and get to know about the food and the dance and the language and the history of how some of these cultures came to America, I think we would have a much more fundamental understanding of one another. But it doesn't seem like that takes place because the segregation in this city is so deep seated that even if there is an ethnic festival for another group, now this obviously doesn't speak to everybody because there are people that go to all of the festivals, but if we had places where we could go and feel comfortable and have positive social interaction, then I think that would help, bring our communities closer together.
Shary?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for personal experience. like you said, it's not, you can't learn everything out of a book. The best teacher is, personal experience. And a lot of people who hold really strong stereotypes, if you hold a stereotype against a particular group, odds are you don't really know anybody personally from that particular group. So all of your information is based on, secondhand information. So I think we need to lean into this tendency to lean more into curiosity over judgment, and really want to learn more about other cultures, other people, as Sherwin was saying. I think, there's something that's common to both of our communities when we think about Asian and Black communities, is that the lack of really education around our histories. It's very limited. So I applaud, the couple that's been on for digging in and going and diving deeper into each other's cultural history. There's not enough of that happening, just even in our schools. So I think there's opportunities there to really build that curiosity and wanting to learn about other cultures, and taking that personal responsibility to expand your networks and invite that diversity into your life. Because I think for me, having a very diverse social network of friends and really close friends, not just acquaintances, but actual friends, that's where the learning happens, that safe space to learn and really get that true experience. And I think that just follows you into every other aspect of your life as well.
Shary and Jero, we had a question very similar for you guys specifically about like whether you have advice for building relationships in our city, which so much of its identity is tied up with segregation and scarcity. Maybe you guys have even some personal experiences you can share about what has worked with people you've had to overcome misunderstandings with.
Just it seems like we all go through similar experiences at different points in our lives, and you just got to explain to those people, and maybe at times give them an analogy of what they're going through and how other people are going through too. It might be the same thing, but it's just different skin color, different. It might be a different situation, but different scenario, but the core issue is the same. So I try to, when people having issues, difficulties with others who they don't know, I try to point that out, give them an analogy, and make them realize that, what they're going through is not much different from what, that person is going through.
I think I would just speak to what the two previous speakers said. I think one thing that's been helpful is just exposure. I think like when we were first introduced, I think people were weary because maybe they had never met someone like me before, or spent significant time around someone like me before. But now that they've met me, they've met my family, we've spent time together, I think people are completely different in terms of their approach. So I think those shared social spaces to facilitate the crossing of those barriers, the crossing of those frontiers that people don't want to cross. I'm going to stay over here, I'm going to stay over there. I think that the sharing of that social space will help kind of break down those lines. And then I also think the curiosity, just asking questions, wanting to learn for the purpose of learning without any type of judgment, just learning to understand and learning to gain knowledge before you form some sort of opinion or perspective. Just kind of gaining that understanding. And then I think you kind of just have to have the hard conversations and understand that, some people will engage and have a different perspective, and some people will engage and not want to change that perspective. But I think the important thing is just starting the conversations, and just having the opportunity to have those conversations, I think is what's important.
And to add, just sharing those social spaces and learning about each other's culture, you may find that there are more similarities than differences that you initially thought, there were. So that really helped us too. Just, seeing those similarities and differences.
Go ahead.
maybe jumping off of that, I know Shary had mentioned earlier, there's like individual actions, but also we could talk about like from individual things, what are some structural things or kind of like policy or sustainable, bigger level things that people can be calling for to bring people together. Maybe I'll send it to you, Shary, if you feel like talking a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's, common causes that, we're all in support of. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all wanting to fight for, safety and equity and, equality for folks. We're all fighting against racism. We're all anti-racist, right? We all want to be on the same side of that fight. So it's not just a division of, oh, I'm not going to support you if you didn't support me. We're not looking at it from the right angle if we're looking at it that way. What we're fighting is racism, right? And all of us should be on the same side of the table for that. So I think when we show up for each other, that's the mentality. It's not about, what's in it for me necessarily. It's about what is right, and really leaning into that. And I think there's opportunities for us to really come together in common causes that impact our entire community that are important to both of us, to all of our communities. And I know Sherwin has more thoughts on that as well.
There's an unspoken political component between some Laotian refugees that fought with America against the North Vietnamese army during the Vietnam War. And I just come to find this out probably in the last like 10 years, and I had no idea that refugees that fought with the United States in the Vietnam War are not eligible for veterans benefits. And for many, many years, there were a lot of Democratic lawmakers that said at all levels of government that is entirely not fair, that we've got individuals that fought with the United States in the Vietnam War, but when they come to this country, they do not get the benefits of any veterans benefits. And, Southeast Asian veterans have got some of the same issues and plagues that everybody, every other veteran has, from PTSD to, the chemical agents that were used in deforestation in the Vietnam War, yet we are still denying them VA benefits. And probably about a decade or so ago, it was a really, really popular topic. And I also thought it was a way in which African-American community, the veterans we have in our community, could work with Southeast Asian war veterans as well to try and come together politically to try and get VA benefits for folks that fought with the United States. But for some reason that conversation just kind of faded away. But I think it's worth considering because people are still suffering from the PTSD from the Vietnam War.
That's very, very interesting. So I'm an optimist, and I believe our young people could be the ones to really bridge that gap. How optimistic are you in our young people on both sides coming together and knocking down some of these walls? And at the same time, so it's a two-part question. How optimistic are you of seeing that happen? And the second part is, do you think they will be able to bring the adults along with them?
I'm optimistic.
How optimistic?
I'm very optimistic because the thing that younger generations have is they have the connectedness. They can communicate and collaborate just as like the default setting where, I'm middle-aged and I can remember, some time ago, maybe the parents or the grandparents of some of these young people that still held anti-Black racist sentiments, but I see in their children and their grandchildren just the uniqueness of being in the same age group, because we classify, millennials and Gen Z, and even though they are very, very diverse, in fact, those younger generations are dramatically more diverse than baby boomers, as an example. They have more in common as a birth cohort than just about anything else. Even though they come from diverse backgrounds, the age group that they are in makes their culture very, very similar, especially when it comes to their use of social media and music and culture, et cetera. So yeah, I am tremendously optimistic. And always, as time goes on, the younger generations are just better, right? They're better than the previous generations because they learn from the mistakes that we may have made.
And I'll add to that, Sherwin, that the younger generation is a bit more courageous and willing to speak up as well. I'm seeing that extremely exhibited in the young AAPI communities that are, they're not following in the footsteps of, they're quiet, keep your head down, elder generations, they're willing to speak out and speak up and, speak out not just for, themselves, but for others anywhere they see injustice. And I've seen a lot of great collaboration. And like Sherwin said, these younger generations have grown up with diversity a lot more visible to them than maybe previous generations have. So it's just a normal part of every day. So you see more humanity and connection with others when you grow up with it. So it's a lot easier to connect to the struggles for others. So stepping up and speaking out for one another seems more natural. And I think there's a lot more, like you said, the collaboration is inherent in their DNA, and their willingness to speak up and use their platforms for that is a lot stronger. So I've seen it happen. I've seen the younger generations try to bring their parents and grandparents along, at least changing their perspectives. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not, but at least that type of generational racism has a stopping point with this new generation.
I think that's about it for us, and we're out of time. And so you guys, thank you so much for our guests for joining us for today's Listen MKE. Thank you all for watching, and just wanted to say again that this is a partnership between WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, the Ideas Lab at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, Milwaukee PBS, and the Milwaukee Public Library. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.